All right, get ready, because today we're diving deep into consciousness research, but with a twist. We're going way beyond just the brain.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. We're going to explore the idea that like your memories and thoughts, even your sense of self, might actually be connected to something much larger.
Exactly. And to help us with this, we're looking at an article called Consciência Além do Cérebro. That's Portuguese for consciousness beyond the brain. It's written by a neuroscientist, Marynês Pereira.
Yeah, Pereira's work is really interesting because she combines neuroscience with quantum physics, which you
Yeah.
don't see every day.
Right. That's a combo I wouldn't have thought of. So before we get too far, maybe we should start with the basics. Like, what does traditional neuroscience tell us about the brain and consciousness?
Well, typically neuroscience focuses on the brain as the command center for all things mental.
Right.
Thoughts, feelings, the whole nine yards. It's like the brain is the hardware and our thoughts are the software.
Okay, that makes sense. So where do Pereira and this idea of consciousness beyond the brain come in?
Well, she, along with some other scientists like Karl Pribram, Walter Schempp, and Ervin Laszlo, challenge that traditional view. They suggest there's something more, something bigger at play.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly are they proposing?
They suggest the existence of a universal information field. Sometimes it's called the zero-point field or the Akashic field, and it basically acts as a massive storehouse of information.
Hold on. So you're saying there's like a giant cosmic cloud, but for thoughts?
Aha, that's a great way to put it. Think of it like this. Your brain is like a computer, and this field is like the internet. Your brain can access, download, and even upload information to this incredible field.
Whoa, okay. So our brains aren't just creating thoughts on their own. They're potentially pulling from and contributing to this vast network of information. That's wild. But I have to ask, how did other scientists react to this idea?
You can probably imagine there was a lot of skepticism at first. These ideas were challenging a lot of long-held assumptions about how consciousness works.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if our brains are more like receivers than generators, how does Pereira explain how they process information from this field? She mentioned something about a holographic universe.
Right. That was an idea put forward by Karl Pribram, a neurosurgeon. He suggested that the brain actually works like a hologram, decoding information that comes from this universal field in the form of waves.
Okay, I'm picturing those wavy lines from sci-fi movies when someone teleports. I think I need a little more to understand how the brain can act like a hologram.
Sure, think about how a hologram works. You shine a laser through a special plate, and it projects a 3D image, right? That image is actually created by interference patterns of the light waves. Pribram suggested the brain functions in a similar way. It interprets the interference patterns of information waves from this field, and that's how we experience the world.
So you're saying that everything we experience, our memories, even our sense of self, it's all just our brain interpreting these wave patterns.
Exactly. And here's the cool part. If the brain stores information holographically, it means that each part of the brain contains information about the whole.
So that's why a smell or a song can suddenly trigger a memory from years ago. It's like our entire past is somehow stored in every part of our brain.
Precisely. Think of it like a shattered hologram. Even a small piece can still recreate the whole image, just with less detail.
Wow, that's amazing. It makes you wonder about the true capacity of the human brain. So Pribram proposed this model of the brain, but where does Walter Schempp fit into all of this? Pereira mentioned him in something called symplectic geometry, which sounds pretty intimidating.
Schempp was a mathematician who actually provided mathematical support for Pribram's ideas. He used symplectic geometry to describe how the brain might actually encode and decode these information waves.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me a bit. What is symplectic geometry, and how does it relate to the brain and this information field?
Let me try to explain it simply. Imagine throwing a pebble into a still pond. You see the ripples spread out, right? Those ripples carry information about the pebble, its size, where it landed, all of that.
Okay, so the ripples are like the information waves from the universal field.
Exactly. Symplectic geometry is a branch of math that helps describe how those waves travel and interact with each other in complex systems like the brain.
So it's like the math that explains how our brains are reading the ripples in the universal pond.
That's a great way to put it.
This is all starting to paint a very different picture of reality.
It is. And there's actually one more piece of the puzzle that we haven't mentioned yet. Pereira also highlights the work of Ervin Laszlo and his integral theory of information.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does Laszlo's theory fit into all of this? What does he bring to the table?
Laszlo tries to connect everything together. He suggests that this universal information field, this Akashic field we keep talking about, isn't just some abstract concept. It's the foundation of the entire universe.
Wait, hold on. So he's saying this field is like the underlying fabric of reality, connecting everyone and everything.
Exactly. It's like the source code of the universe. And our brains are constantly tapping into it, downloading and uploading information.
Wow, that's a pretty profound concept. It completely shifts our perspective from a purely materialist view of the brain to one that says consciousness is potentially interconnected with something much larger.
And that leads to some even bigger questions about the nature of reality itself. If our consciousness is intertwined with this field, what does that mean for our understanding of the universe and our place in it?
That is a huge question, and it makes me wonder, if we're all connected to this universal field of information, what are the implications for us as individuals? Does it change how we think about our thoughts, our actions, our relationships with each other?
Those are exactly the kind of questions we'll be exploring next. Get ready, because this deep dive is about to get even more interesting as we start to unpack the impact of these ideas on you and your life.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about this crazy idea that our consciousness might be connected to a universal information field, and that the brain acts as like a receiver and transmitter.
Right, we were just starting to explore what that could mean for how we live our lives.
Exactly. So if we're all potentially plugged into this universal consciousness, what are the implications for us day to day? Pereira, she has a background in psychology. She really dives into how these ideas could change the way we think about things like our thoughts, actions, and even our relationships.
It really is a fascinating area of study if our consciousness isn't just limited to our brains. If it's part of this larger interconnected field, then it makes you think that our thoughts and beliefs might have a much wider influence than we realize.
Okay, that's super interesting. But I gotta ask, is there any scientific evidence to back this up? Or is this mostly theoretical?
Well, the research is definitely ongoing. But there's growing evidence that suggests our minds can influence our bodies in some pretty amazing ways. Take the placebo effect, for example. Studies have shown that people can experience real physical changes just from believing they're receiving a treatment, even if it's just a sugar pill.
So you're saying the power of belief can actually create physical changes. That's pretty wild. But how does that tie into this whole universal field of consciousness thing?
Well, if you think about our minds constantly interacting with this field, then it makes sense that our beliefs and expectations could be shaping not just our own internal reality, but also influencing the information we're drawing from and contributing to the field.
So are you saying our thoughts and beliefs could actually be influencing other people, even if we don't realize it?
It's definitely a possibility that researchers are looking into.
Yeah.
It connects to this idea of non-local consciousness, that our minds aren't limited by space and time and the way we usually think about them.
Okay, now that's where my brain starts to melt a little. I need some examples. What kind of evidence is there that this non-local connection could actually be real?
There have been some really intriguing studies on distant healing, where people have reported feeling better after someone miles away directed healing thoughts towards them.
Wait, so someone just thinks healing thoughts about another person, and that person actually starts to feel better? How is that even possible?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
It definitely challenges our understanding of how things work. But if we entertain the idea that consciousness can operate beyond the limits of space and time, it opens up all sorts of new possibilities.
So if our thoughts can potentially impact others from far away, what about intuition or empathy? Could those be examples of non-local consciousness too?
Absolutely. Intuition, that gut feeling you get, could be seen as tapping into information from the field that your conscious mind isn't aware of. And empathy, the ability to feel what others are feeling, might be a sign of our interconnectedness at the level of consciousness.
Wow, this is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about how the mind works. But if our thoughts and beliefs have this much power, if they can impact ourselves and potentially others, doesn't that raise some ethical concerns?
It definitely does. If our minds are all linked like this, we need to be really careful about the thoughts and intentions we're putting out into the world. Pereira emphasizes this point in her article. She suggests that this new understanding of consciousness requires us to be much more responsible for our thoughts and actions.
So it's not just about using this knowledge to benefit ourselves. It's about recognizing that we're all part of something bigger. And our thoughts and actions can have a ripple effect that goes way beyond us.
Exactly. It's a reminder to be more aware, to practice compassion, and to be responsible for how we think, speak, and interact with the world around us.
This is a lot to digest for sure, but before we jump into all the ethical stuff, I want to circle back to something Pereira mentioned, neuroplasticity. How does that fit into this whole picture of consciousness being beyond the brain?
Neuroplasticity is a really important piece of the puzzle. It shows just how adaptable our brains are. They're not static. They're constantly changing and rewiring themselves based on our experiences, thoughts, and even our beliefs.
So if our brains can actually change, does that mean we can change our own reality?
It's a fascinating question, and one that researchers are exploring in neuroscience and epigenetics. The evidence suggests that by changing our thoughts and beliefs, we can actually alter the neural pathways in our brains.
So instead of being victims of our circumstances, we actually have more power than we realize to create our own reality. That's incredibly empowering. But let's pause for a moment and reflect on how far we've come. We've gone from the brain as a standalone computer to the brain as a receiver and transmitter for a universal consciousness. We've talked about the potential impact on our health, our relationships, even our understanding of reality itself.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey so far, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Right. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I think it's time to tackle the spiritual and philosophical implications of these mind-blowing ideas. After all, if our consciousness is a part of something bigger, does that mean there's something beyond this physical existence? Stay with us because we're about to explore some of humanity's biggest questions. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, when we started this whole deep dive into consciousness beyond the brain, I never thought we'd end up talking about life and death.
Yeah, it's been pretty intense, hasn't it? But these big questions just naturally come up when you start thinking about consciousness maybe not being limited to our physical bodies.
For sure. And speaking of big questions, before we wrap up, I want to bring us back to the article by Marynês Pereira that got us started. In her conclusion, Pereira asks this really thought-provoking question that kind of sums up everything we've been talking about.
Oh, I'm curious. What is it?
She asks, if our consciousness really is part of something bigger, if our thoughts and intentions can actually influence reality, then what responsibility do we have for our actions?
That's a powerful question. It gets right to the heart of all the ethical stuff we were discussing earlier. If we're all interconnected, like the research suggests, then our actions, even the small ones, could have these ripple effects throughout this whole web of consciousness.
Exactly. It's like suddenly realizing that every thought you have, every word you say, every choice you make, it's like throwing a stone into a pond. Those ripples spread out, impacting not just you, but the entire pond.
That can be kind of scary at first, but it's also incredibly empowering. It means we have the power to create positive change, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
So how do we actually navigate this interconnected world responsibly? What can we do to make sure we're having a positive impact?
Well, like we said before, being mindful is huge. Start by paying attention to your thoughts and intentions. Are you mostly focused on fear and negativity? Or are you choosing to focus on love, abundance, and compassion?
So it's about making a conscious effort to put out good vibes, basically.
Exactly. And remember, we're all learning and growing. We're all going to make mistakes. It's about being kind to yourself, learning from those mistakes, and trying to align your actions with your values.
It's about progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly. And there are tools and practices that can help us along the way. Meditation, mindfulness, gratitude practices, even just spending time in nature. All of these things can help us calm our minds, connect with our inner wisdom, and just be more positive and compassionate.
Those are great suggestions. It sounds like it's all about building a lifestyle that supports awareness and intention. But what about the bigger picture? If we're all connected, how can we work together to make the world a better place?
That's where things get really exciting. When we shift from seeing ourselves as separate individuals and start recognizing our interconnectedness, it opens up so many possibilities for collaborating and taking action together.
So instead of just focusing on our own well-being, we start thinking about the well-being of everyone.
Exactly. We start to realize that we're all in this together. And when we act from that place of understanding, we can create positive change that goes way beyond ourselves.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today. We've explored some pretty complex ideas, but I hope you found this deep dive as interesting as we have.
It's been a pleasure discussing these ideas with you.
And a huge thank you to Marynês Pereira for her insightful article, Consciência Além do Cérebro, which inspired this whole journey. We'll be sure to include a link to her work in the show notes so you can check it out for yourselves.
And remember, exploring consciousness is an ongoing journey. Keep asking questions, keep an open mind, and most importantly, keep exploring the infinite possibilities that lie within you and within this interconnected web of life.
That's it for this deep dive into consciousness beyond the brain. Until next time, keep exploring and keep diving deep.